She was worth $3 billion. He had 17 in his wallet. The marriage contract said 50 million. His answer would be no. November rain hammered the streets of Manhattan, turning Fifth Avenue into a river of brake lights and reflected neon. Marcus Cole stood at the corner of East 58th, squinting at the ink bleeding across a crumpled paper in his calloused hand. The address was still legible. 342 East 58th, 7 o'clock. He looked up at the brass numbers beside an ornate entrance. This was the place, except it made no sense whatsoever. The building before him housed a restaurant called Aurelius, the kind with cursive gold lettering, and a doorman in burgundy, who probably earned more in tips than Marcus made in a week. Through tall windows, he could see crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, people dressed like they'd stepped out of magazines he'd never read. Marcus caught his reflection in a rain-slicked Mercedes window. Work boots still dusty from the construction site. Jeans that had seen better days. Flannel shirt under a canvas jacket built for function, not fashion. Dark hair damp, an unruly trace of drywall dust on his collar he'd missed. This could not be right. Frank Martelli, his foreman, had been specific. Meet me at 342 East 58th, 7 o'clock. Grab a bite, talk about the supervisor position. It was supposed to be casual, a diner, maybe a sports bar, somewhere normal people ate, not this. Marcus checked his phone. 3 missed calls from Frank, and all from 2 hours ago. No voicemails, no texts explaining a change of plans. The battery icon blinked at 4%. He'd forgotten to charge it again, one more small failure in a day full of them. The doorman was watching him now, one eyebrow slightly raised in that particular way that said everything without saying anything. Marcus took a breath. Maybe Frank was already inside. Maybe there was a simple explanation. Maybe he'd walked to the wrong entrance, and there was actually a casual place around the corner. Or maybe, and this seemed more likely with each passing second, he'd gotten the address completely wrong and was about to make a complete fool of himself. He walked toward the entrance. The doorman's expression shifted from suspicious to professionally neutral as he opened the door. The warmth hit immediately, along with scents Marcus couldn't begin to identify. Wine, herbs, butter, money. A woman in an elegant black dress appeared from nowhere, her smile perfect, and practiced the kind that cost years of customer service training to perfect. Welcome to Aurelius. Do you have a reservation? Marcus's mouth went dry. He'd practiced this moment on the subway, what he'd say, how he'd explain. None of it felt adequate now. I'm supposed to be meeting someone. Frank Martelli. She glanced at a leather-bound book finger, tracing down a list of names that probably didn't include anyone wearing work boots. I don't see a Martelli this evening, but let me check with the host. She gestured toward a man in an immaculate suit standing near a podium. The host, Jean-Paul, apparently approached with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd spent decades perfecting the art of discretion. He was older, gray at the temples, with bearing that suggested he'd seen everything and been impressed by very little. Good evening. How may I assist you? I'm looking for Frank Martelli. We were supposed to meet at 7. Your name, sir? Marcus. Marcus Cole. There was a pause as Jean-Paul consulted his book, then his tablet, then his book again. Marcus was about to apologize and leave when the man's expression shifted, subtle but noticeable. Ah, Mr. Cole. Yes, we have you down for 7 o'clock. His eyes flickered over Marcus's appearance for just a fraction of a second, a professional assessment that revealed nothing and everything. Right this way, please. Wait, I think there might be a mistake. But Jean-Paul was already walking, moving through the dining room with the expectation that Marcus would follow. And because he didn't know what else to do, because walking out now would mean admitting he didn't belong here and giving these people the satisfaction of being right, Marcus did. The restaurant was even more intimidating inside. The ceiling soared above them, featuring a 4-story wine tower illuminated from within like some kind of liquid cathedral. The tables were set with more silverware than Marcus had in his entire apartment. Other diners looked like they belonged in boardrooms and country clubs. Tailored suits, designer dresses, jewelry that probably cost more than his truck. Marcus felt like an imposter at a royal ball waiting for someone to shout that the peasant had snuck past the guards. Jean-Paul led him to a table in a quieter corner, still visible and still elegant, but slightly removed from the main dining area. A small candle flickered in a crystal holder. 2 place settings, Two menus already waiting thick paper that whispered wealth when touched. Your table, Mr. Cole. Your associate will be joining you shortly. Listen, I really think there's been a mix-up. Can I start you with something to drink? Perhaps some wine while you wait? Just water is fine, but I really think still or sparkling? Still, thank you. But Jean-Paul was already gone, moving with that same efficient grace toward the kitchen, leaving Marcus standing there, utterly out of his depth. The chair alone probably cost more than his rent. The napkin was folded into some kind of origami swan. The menu had no prices on it, which Marcus had heard meant they were expensive enough that if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. He should leave. This was clearly a mistake. He'd somehow gotten his wires crossed with someone else's reservation, and when whoever actually belonged at this table showed up, it would be embarrassing for everyone. But then his phone buzzed. 4% battery, a notification from the video chat app. Sophie, 7 o'clock. He'd promised to call her at 7 to say goodnight, the one promise he never broke no matter how tired he was, no matter how late the job ran. Marcus sat down carefully like the chair might shatter under him and opened the app. The call connected immediately, and suddenly the formal, intimidating restaurant faded into background noise as his daughter's face filled the screen. Daddy, this smile came automatically genuine, washing away all his anxiety about wrong restaurants and expensive wine towers. Hey, sweetheart. Sophie Cole was 7 years old with dark curls that she refused to let anyone brush properly and eyes that were exactly like her mother's. Warm, bright, entirely too clever for her own good. She was wearing her favorite pajamas, the ones with the little dinosaurs that she'd picked out herself and insisted on wearing 4 nights a week. Where are you? That doesn't look like your apartment. I'm at a restaurant, baby. Remember I told you I had a meeting tonight? It looks fancy. She leaned closer to her screen, trying to see more of the background, her nose almost touching the camera. Are there rich people there? Marcus laughed quietly, aware of the other diners, even as his world narrowed to just her face. Yeah, baby, very rich people. Do they have dinosaur nuggets? I don't think so. Then it's not that fancy. God, he loved her. 3 years since Sarah had died, and every day Sophie reminded him more of his late wife. Her humor, her logic, her way of cutting through nonsense to what actually mattered, the trait that had made Sarah such a good doctor before the cancer ate through her like acid. How was school today? Sophie launched into a detailed explanation of the art project they'd worked on, something involving a lot of glitter, and what she described as a regrettable incident with glue. Marcus listened, nodding and asking questions, temporarily forgetting where he was, forgetting the absurdity of sitting in a restaurant that probably charged more for bread than he spent on groceries in a week. Until he noticed the woman. She was standing about 10 feet away, perfectly still, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. And she was striking. That was the word that came to mind, though it felt inadequate. She wore a navy dress that looked like it had been designed specifically for her body, with dark hair pulled back in a style that was simultaneously casual and impossibly elegant. Her posture was perfect, shoulders back, chin level, the kind of bearing that came from years of expensive education and even more expensive confidence. But it was her eyes that caught him. Sharp, intelligent, gray-green like the ocean before a storm. And in this moment, utterly confused. She was looking at the table at him, at the table again. Marcus realized with sinking certainty that this was her table, the real reservation, and he was sitting in her seat like some kind of trespasser who'd wandered in off the street. Sophie, sweetie, I need to call you back in just a minute, okay? But you didn't hear about the glue part, I know, and I want to hear all about it, I promise. 2 minutes. You promise, promise, I promise, I love you. Love you too, Daddy. The call ended. Marcus looked up at the woman who was now definitely staring at him, her expression a careful mask of CEO composure, cracking at the edges. He started to stand his chair, scraping slightly against the polished floor. I'm sorry, I think there's been a mistake. But before he could finish, Jean-Paul appeared again this time, addressing the woman with a slight bow that spoke of long familiarity and deep respect. Miss Sterling, your table is ready. Miss Sterling's gaze didn't leave Marcus's face. Up close, he could see the calculations happening behind those storm-colored eyes, the rapid assessment of a situation that had clearly veered off script. She should have corrected Jean-Paul, should have pointed out the obvious error, should have had Marcus removed from her table with the same efficiency she probably used to fire underperforming executives. Instead, she did something that surprised both of them. She sat down. "Thank you, Jean-Paul. That will be all." Jean-Paul hesitated for just a moment. Professionals like him could sense when the script was being deviated, from when the carefully orchestrated evening was going somewhere unexpected. But then he nodded and withdrew, disappearing into the background like smoke. Marcus remained standing, completely bewildered, his hands still on the back of his chair, like he was frozen mid-escape. "I think there's been a mistake. This is clearly your table, and I was waiting for someone else, and I should probably just—" "Sit down, Mr. Cole." It wasn't a request. It was delivered in the tone of someone who was used to being obeyed, someone who gave orders to rooms full of people and expected immediate compliance. Marcus found himself sitting before he'd consciously decided to do so, his body responding to that command voice before his brain could catch up. Victoria Sterling, because that's who she was, though. Marcus didn't know it yet. Folded her hands on the table and studied him with the intensity of a scientist examining an unexpected specimen, something that shouldn't exist in nature but somehow did. "You're not Jonathan. No, I'm Marcus, and I'm definitely not supposed to be here. Neither am I, apparently." She picked up her menu without looking at it, her eyes still fixed on him, like she was trying to solve an equation that didn't balance. And yet here we are. A server appeared different from before, younger, with the same nervous efficiency, and poured water into their glasses from a bottle that probably cost more than Marcus's phone bill. The water tasted exactly like water everywhere, which somehow made the whole thing more absurd. "Can I bring you something from the wine list while you decide?" Victoria glanced at Marcus, one eyebrow raised in a question that felt like a test. "I'm fine with water. 2 glasses of the Stag's Leap Cabernet 2015, and we'll need a few minutes with the menu." The server nodded and disappeared like all the staff seemed to do here, materializing and vanishing with practiced precision. Marcus leaned forward slightly, keeping his voice low, even though the nearest occupied table was 20 feet away. "I don't think you understand. I literally walked into the wrong restaurant. I was supposed to meet my foreman to talk about a job. I can't afford a glass of wine here. I probably can't afford a glass of water here. The wine is already ordered. It would be rude to send it back." Victoria's expression remained neutral, but there was something in her eyes now, a glimmer that might have been amusement or challenge, or some combination he couldn't parse. "And you're not being asked to pay for it." "I don't accept charity. It's not charity. It's curiosity." She finally opened her menu, scanning it with the casual air of someone who'd seen 1,000 similar menus and found them all equally unimpressive. "I was expecting to have dinner with someone incredibly boring tonight. A setup arranged by my board of directors and my father, to be precise. Someone appropriate, someone suitable, someone who would spend the entire evening discussing market shares and strategic partnerships." She looked up from the menu, and for the first time since sitting down, something almost human flickered across her face. "You, Mr. Cole, are clearly none of those things. So I'm curious." "That's accurate. The universe has presented me with an unexpected alternative to an excruciating evening." Why should I waste it? Marcus didn't know what to say to that logic. This woman, whoever she was, spoke with the kind of casual confidence that came from a life where things generally went the way she wanted them to. Yet here she was actively choosing chaos over whatever careful plan had been laid out for her evening. The wine arrived. The server poured 2 glasses with ceremonial care, usually reserved for religious rituals, then retreated once more into the background. Victoria lifted her glass, and in that moment, she looked less like a CEO and more like a woman who just made a decision she couldn't quite believe herself. To wrong turns. Marcus hesitated, then picked up his own glass. The crystal felt impossibly delicate in his work-roughened hands, like something that might shatter if he breathed wrong. To wrong turns. The wine was extraordinarily rich and complex in ways that Marcus couldn't begin to describe, completely wasted on him if he was being honest. He was more of a beer guy, the kind that came in 6-packs from the corner store. But he appreciated the gesture, even if he didn't fully understand it. "So, tell me, Marcus Cole, who was meeting his foreman. What do you do, construction? Day labor mostly. Drywall framing, whatever needs doing?" Marcus saw no point in dressing it up and pretending to be something he wasn't. "I'm good at it. I'm sure you are." There was no condescension in her tone, no hint of judgment or pity, which surprised him more than anything else about this entire surreal evening. Just simple acceptance of a fact. And the little girl on your phone, my daughter. Sophie. She's 7. You call her every night I can. Sometimes I'm on a site without cell service, but yeah, every night. Something shifted in Victoria's expression, softened almost imperceptibly like watching ice begin to thaw in early spring. That's nice. It's necessary. Marcus took another sip of wine, feeling the warmth spread through his chest, loosening something that had been tight since he'd walked through the door. Her mother died 3 years ago. Cancer. It was fast. 8 months from diagnosis to... He stopped surprised at himself. He didn't usually talk about Sarah to strangers, didn't share that particular wound with people he'd just met. But there was something about Victoria Sterling's direct gaze, the way she listened like she was actually hearing, instead of just waiting for her turn to speak, that made the words slip out. Anyway, it's just the two of us now, so yeah, I call every night. Victoria was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the stem of her wine glass in a gesture that seemed unconscious, unguarded. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. Where is she now, your daughter? With my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. She watches Sophie when I have to work late, or apparently when I accidentally crash fancy dinners. He smiled slightly, trying to lighten the moment. Sophie's probably telling her all about the glitter incident right now. Glitter incident art class. There was glue involved. The details are apparently quite important. The corner of Victoria's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Sounds serious. Life and death from what I gather. The server returned, ready to take their order. Victoria ordered something in what sounded like French, but might have been a language Marcus had never heard. He glanced down at his menu in mild panic. Nothing had prices. Half the words looked like they'd been borrowed from other languages and never given back. I'll have the same. He hoped it wasn't something too weird, hoped he wouldn't embarrass himself by not knowing which fork to use or how to properly eat whatever arrived. When the server left, Victoria leaned back in her chair, studying him again, with that same analytical intensity, like he was a problem she was trying to solve or a code she was trying to crack. You're not what I expected to find at this table tonight. Yeah, well, you're not what I expected either. Marcus met her gaze, directly refusing to be intimidated, even though every instinct screamed that he was outmatched here. No offense, but you're kind of terrifying. That did get a smile. A real one, quick and genuine, transforming her face for just a moment into something warmer, more approachable. Good. I've worked very hard to be terrifying. Why? The smile faded like sun disappearing behind clouds. Because in my world, Mr. Cole, anything less than terrifying gets eaten alive. There was weight in the way she said it, a weariness that made Marcus think this wasn't just corporate bravado. This was truth hard-earned and harder lived. What world is that? Victoria picked up her wine glass again, but didn't drink, just held it like she was drawing comfort from the familiar weight. The kind where dinner isn't dinner, where every conversation is a negotiation, where even your father arranges dates like their merger proposals. She paused, and in that pause, Marcus could see all the things she wasn't saying, all the careful control she maintained just to survive in whatever world she inhabited. The kind where you sometimes wish you could just walk into the wrong restaurant. Is that what this is? Your version of walking into the wrong restaurant, perhaps? She took a sip of wine, her expression thoughtful, walls lowering just enough for him to see the person underneath the armor. Or perhaps you walked into the right one. Their first course arrived something delicate and artfully arranged on white porcelain, like it belonged in a museum, instead of on a plate. Marcus watched Victoria pick up the correct fork from the array beside her plate and followed her lead, grateful for the guidance. The food was incredible, some kind of fish with a sauce that tasted like the ocean had been distilled into liquid silk, but it felt almost criminal to swallow it. Good. Victoria asked her the question like she genuinely wanted to know his opinion, like his answer mattered. Honestly, I'm kind of afraid to swallow it. Feels like it should be in a museum. She laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that seemed to surprise her as much as it surprised him. That's the most honest review this place has probably ever received. They ate in companionable silence for a moment, the kind of quiet that felt comfortable instead of awkward. Then Victoria set down her fork and fixed him with that penetrating stare again. Can I ask you something, Marcus? Sure. Why did you sit down when you realized this wasn't your table? Why didn't you just leave? Marcus thought about it, taking another bite of the incredible food while he considered his answer. My phone was dying. I needed to call Sophie, and I figured I'd wait here for a minute, make the call, then explain the mix-up and find the actual place I was supposed to be. He shrugged the gesture, feeling inadequate for explaining the chain of small decisions that had led him to this moment. Then you showed up, and things got weird. Weird. Victoria repeated the word like she was tasting it, rolling it around in her mouth to see how it felt. Yes, I suppose that's accurate. Your turn. Why did you sit down? You clearly knew I wasn't whoever you were supposed to meet. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Marcus thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than before, almost vulnerable. Because I've spent the last 34 years sitting at the right tables, meeting the right people, saying the right things. And in 34 years, I don't think I've ever had a real conversation. Not one that mattered. She met his eyes, and in that moment, all the CEO confidence had stripped away, leaving just a woman who was tired of pretending. And then I walk in here and find a man in work boots talking to his daughter about glitter, sitting at my table like he has every right to be here. And I thought she trailed off, seeming to catch herself before revealing too much. What I thought, maybe just this once I could sit at the wrong table too. The second course arrived, then the third. As the evening unfolded, something strange happened. The awkwardness faded, replaced by an ease that neither of them expected. Victoria asked questions about his work, about Sophie, about his life in a way that felt genuinely curious rather than politely probing. Marcus, in turn, found himself asking about her world carefully at first, then with more confidence as she answered with surprising candor. She told him about the company she ran. Sterling Industries, apparently a major player in sustainable technology, though she described it with none of the pride he would have expected. She talked about board meetings that felt like battles, about a father who viewed affection as a weakness, about the constant pressure to perform to prove to perfect. So this dinner tonight. This was another performance. Marcus asked the question after finishing his fourth course, some kind of lamb that melted on his tongue, like it was apologizing for being eaten. More than that, an audition. Victoria's expression hardened slightly, walls going back up. Jonathan Carmichael, old money, new degrees, impeccable breeding. He checks every box my board of directors requires for someone who might eventually. She stopped herself, seeming to reconsider how much to share. Eventually what? She studied him for a moment, as if calculating how much truth to share with a stranger in work boots who'd stumbled into her carefully controlled world. Then she seemed to make a decision. My board believes I should marry someone suitable, someone who can provide stability, airs the right connections. Her voice was flat, clinical, like she was describing a quarterly earnings report instead of her own life. Jonathan was candidate number 3. Marcus set down his fork, the lamb suddenly tasting like ash in his mouth. They're arranging your marriage, like we're in the 1800s. In my world, Marcus, we never really left the 1800s. We just got better at pretending. And you're okay with this? I didn't say that. She took a long drink of wine, and Marcus noticed her hand tremble slightly, the first crack in her composure all evening. But what I'm okay with and what I have a choice about aren't always the same thing. Everyone has choices. Do they? There was an edge to her voice now, sharp enough to cut. When your entire life has been built around a company that bears your family name, when thousands of jobs depend on the decisions you make, when walking away means destroying everything 3 generations built. She leaned forward, and Marcus could see something fierce burning behind those perceptive eyes. Tell me, Marcus, if choosing what you wanted meant Sophie lost her home, her school, her stability, would you still say everyone has choices? He didn't answer immediately. She'd hit a nerve, and she knew it, her expression softening slightly, like she regretted the sharpness of her words. That's different. Is it? Or is it just different degrees of the same cage? They looked at each other across the table, across the divide of white tablecloth and crystal stemware, and all the distance between their worlds. 2 people from completely different lives, both trapped in their own ways, both struggling against constraints they hadn't chosen. The server appeared with dessert, something chocolate, and architecturally impossible, a structure of cocoa and sugar that defied gravity. Marcus picked up his spoon, then set it down again. Can I ask you something now? Of course. If you could choose, really choose with no consequences, what would you want? Victoria didn't answer right away. She stared at the dessert in front of her like it held answers she'd been searching for, like the chocolate structure might collapse and reveal some hidden truth underneath. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know, isn't that pathetic? 34 years old, running a multi-billion-dollar company, and I don't know what I actually want. She looked up at him, and he could see the loneliness in her eyes, the weight of all those years of doing what was expected instead of what was desired. What about you? What do you want to give Sophie a good life? To be a good father, to do work I'm proud of. Marcus shrugged, the gesture encompassing everything he couldn't put into words. Simple stuff. Simple. Victoria echoed the word, and there was longing in her voice, hunger for something she'd never tasted. That sounds nice. They finished dessert in thoughtful silence, the chocolate structure proving to be as delicious as it was impressive. The restaurant had gotten quieter around them. Other diners had left couples finishing their own carefully orchestrated evenings, and the staff was beginning the subtle choreography of closing preparations. Marcus glanced at his phone. 9:30. He'd been here for over 2 hours, sitting at a table that wasn't his, with a woman he'd just met, having a conversation that felt more real than most he'd had in the 3 years since Sarah died. I should probably go. Need to get back to Sophie. Finish that call I promised her. Of course. Victoria signaled for the check with a subtle gesture. Marcus barely caught the kind of practiced movement that spoke of a lifetime of dining in places like this. She produced a credit card seemingly from nowhere, black metal, that caught the candlelight, the kind that had no limit, because the people who carried them didn't need limits. Wait, I should at least pay for my half. Don't be ridiculous. She handed the card to the waiting server without looking at the total, without even checking what the damage was. This evening has been unexpected. The least I can do is cover dinner. I can't let you. You can and you will. There was that commanding tone again, brooking no argument. Consider it payment for the most interesting conversation I've had in years. Jean-Paul appeared with a leather folder. Victoria signed without looking at the total, then stood. Marcus rose as well, feeling once again acutely aware of how out of place he was, how this entire evening had been some kind of beautiful accident that would end the moment he walked back out into the rain. They walked toward the exit together. At the door, Victoria turned to him, and in the dim light of the entrance, she looked different somehow. Softer, more uncertain. Thank you, Marcus Cole, for the wrong table. Thank you for not having me thrown out. She smiled, a real smile, this time unguarded and warm. If you're ever in the neighborhood again and feel like walking into the wrong restaurant, I'll know where to find you. Perhaps. They stood there for a moment, neither quite ready to end whatever this strange evening had been. Then Victoria did something that surprised both of them. She pulled a business card from her clutch and handed it to him. Heavy stock, embossed lettering, in case you ever want to discuss glitter incidents or anything else. Marcus took the card, feeling the weight of it, the quality of the paper that spoke of wealth beyond his comprehension. Victoria Sterling, CEO, Sterling Industries. And below it, a personal number. I don't usually give that out. I won't use it. Marcus replied automatically, a defense mechanism against getting hopes up or reading too much into simple gestures. Number 1, I don't suppose you will. She sounded almost disappointed. But I hope you might. The doorman held the door open. The rain had stopped, leaving the street slick and shining under the streetlights. Manhattan washed clean and gleaming. Good night, Victoria. Good night, Marcus. He walked out into the November night, the business card in his pocket feeling heavier than it should, like it carried more weight than mere paper and ink. Behind him through the window, he could see Victoria still standing there, watching him leave with an expression he couldn't quite read. Marcus pulled out his phone. 2% battery. He called Mrs. Patterson to let her know he was on his way, then started the long subway ride back to Queens, back to his real life, back to his daughter and his studio apartment and his work boots that would be waiting by the door in the morning. The whole evening felt like a dream, like he'd stepped through a portal into someone else's life for a few hours. And now he was stepping back into his own, except for the card in his pocket, and except for the fact that he couldn't stop thinking about her. Meanwhile, back in the restaurant, Victoria Sterling stood at the window and watched Marcus disappear into the subway station down the street. Jean-Paul approached quietly, his footsteps making no sound on the polished floor. Shall I call your car, Miss Sterling? Not yet. She was still staring at the spot where Marcus had vanished, like if she looked hard enough, she might see him reappear. Jean-Paul, do you believe in fate? The host considered the question seriously, giving it the weight it deserved. I believe we make 1,000 small choices every day, and sometimes those choices surprise us. That's a very diplomatic answer. I've worked in restaurants for 30 years, Miss Sterling. I've learned that the most interesting evenings are the ones that don't go according to plan. Victoria finally turned away from the window, breaking the spell. I was supposed to meet Jonathan Carmichael tonight. I know. You gave his table to someone else. I gave your table to its rightful reservation holder. Mr. Cole's name was in our system. The reservation was for 7 o'clock. Everything was correct. Except I didn't make a reservation for Mr. Cole. No, ma'am. Jean-Paul paused the slightest hesitation before continuing. But someone did. Or perhaps it was simply a glitch in our system. These things happen. They both knew that things like that didn't simply happen at Aurelius. The reservation system was managed with the precision of Swiss banking, every detail triple-checked and verified. But neither of them said it out loud. "Where's Jonathan?" Mr. Carmichael called at 6:45 to confirm his reservation. He arrived at 7:03. I informed him that your table was occupied and offered him our finest alternative seating. He was not pleased. Jean-Paul's expression remained neutral, but there was a glint in his eye. He left approximately 7 minutes later, after making several calls that I believe included your father's number. Victoria closed her eyes. She could imagine those calls, could hear her father's voice rising in that particular way that meant someone had disrupted his carefully laid plans. My phone has been on silent. I suspected as much. My father is going to be furious. Yes, ma'am, most likely. She opened her eyes and looked at Jean-Paul. Really looked at him, seeing past the professional facade to the man underneath who just helped her do something completely out of character. You knew. You knew I was walking into the wrong table, and you let me do it anyway. I seated you at your reserved table, ma'am. What you chose to do once seated was entirely your decision. Thank you, Jean-Paul. You're welcome, Miss Sterling. He gestured toward the door with the same practiced grace he'd shown all evening. Your car. Yes, thank you. As she walked out into the cool November night, Victoria pulled out her phone. 17 missed calls, 9 from her father, 6 from board members, 2 from her assistant. She deleted them all without listening, a small act of rebellion that felt larger than it was. Then she stood on the curb waiting for her driver and thought about a man in work boots who talked to his daughter about glitter, who walked away from the most expensive dinner he'd probably ever seen without asking for anything, who looked at her like she was just a person instead of a net worth or a title or a strategic opportunity. Her phone rang again. Her father. She answered this time because delaying the inevitable only made it worse. Victoria Elizabeth Sterling. What in God's name were you thinking? Hello, father. Jonathan called me. Said you stood him up. Said you were having dinner with some construction worker in flannel. That's accurate. There was a dangerous pause, the kind that preceded volcanic eruptions. This isn't funny, Victoria. I didn't say it was funny. You asked what happened. I told you. Do you have any idea what you've done? Jonathan was perfect. His family, his credentials, his complete lack of interest in anything beyond quarterly reports, and his Harvard legacy. This isn't about interest, Victoria. This is about stability, about the company, about your future, my future. She watched her car pull up to the curb, the driver getting out to open her door. Tell me, father, when does my future actually become mine? Don't be dramatic. You know what's at stake here? I do. That's the problem. She ended the call and slid into the back seat of the car. The driver, Marcus, who'd been with her for 6 years and knew better than to make small talk when she looked like this, simply pulled away from the curb and headed toward her penthouse in Tribeca. Victoria leaned her head against the cool window and thought about wrong tables and right conversations and the strange, unsettling feeling that she'd just made either the best or worst decision of her life. She still couldn't tell which. Back in Queens, Marcus climbed the 3 flights of stairs to his apartment, exhausted but strangely energized. Mrs. Patterson opened the door before he could knock, Sophie already in her arms, half asleep. Daddy, Sophie mumbled, reaching for him. He took her carefully, nodding his thanks to Mrs. Patterson, who waved away his apologies for being late. Long meeting, something like that. Must have been important. You smell like expensive wine. Marcus laughed quietly. It was complicated. Inside the apartment, he carried Sophie to her small room, really just a corner partitioned off with a bookshelf, but she decorated it with drawings and string lights, and she loved it. He tucked her into bed and her eyes fluttered open. You promised to call back. I know, sweetie. I'm sorry. Was the meeting good? Yeah, it was good. Did you get the job? Marcus paused. He'd completely forgotten about Frank, about the supervisor position, about the entire reason he'd gone out tonight. He pulled out his phone. Dead now. Made a mental note to charge it and call Frank first thing in the morning. We'll see, baby. Get some sleep. Love you, Daddy. Love you too. He kissed her forehead and watched her drift back to sleep, her breathing evening out into the steady rhythm of childhood dreams. Then he went to his own room, barely big enough for a bed and a dresser, and pulled out the business card. Victoria Sterling, CEO Sterling Industries. He should throw it away. Whatever that evening had been, it was a moment out of time, a strange, impossible intersection of two lives that had no business intersecting. She had her world, he had his, and never the two should meet. But he didn't throw it away. Instead, he put it in his wallet behind his license and tried not to think about the way she'd smiled when he made her laugh. Tried not to think about the loneliness he'd seen in her eyes when she talked about her carefully constructed life. Tried not to think about how easy it had been to talk to her like they'd known each other for years instead of hours. He failed at all of it. 3 days later, November 10th, Marcus was working on a residential renovation in Brooklyn when his phone rang. He almost didn't answer, figuring it was another robocall about his car's extended warranty. But something made him look at the screen. Unknown number. He answered, stepping away from the noise of power tools, and shouted instructions. Hello, Marcus. It's Victoria. Victoria Sterling. A pause while his brain caught up with the fact that she'd actually called, that the number she'd given him was real, and not just a polite gesture she'd never expected him to use. Victoria. Hi, I didn't expect to hear from you. I didn't expect to call. She sounded different on the phone. Less certain. More human. I have a proposition for you, a business proposition. Okay. He was wary now, wondering what kind of business a billionaire CEO could possibly have with a construction worker. What kind of proposition I'd like to meet and discuss it in person. Are you free this evening? Yeah, I guess. But Victoria, there's a coffee shop on the corner of Lexington and 42nd. Do you know it? I can find it. 6 o'clock, Marcus looked down at his dust-covered work clothes at the compound under his fingernails. I'll be coming straight from work. That's fine. I'll see you at 6. She hung up before he could ask any more questions, leaving him standing in the middle of a half-demolished kitchen, wondering what the hell he'd just agreed to. The coffee shop was one of those trendy Brooklyn places with exposed brick and reclaimed wood furniture, where a regular coffee cost $7 and came with a lecture about single-origin beans. Marcus ordered black coffee and found a table near the back, trying not to think about how the chair probably cost more than his toolbox. Victoria arrived exactly at 6, and somehow she made walking into a coffee shop look like a power move. Charcoal gray suit that fit like armor, hair pulled back in a twist that spoke of professional styling and careful control. Every head in the place turned to watch her pass, but she seemed oblivious to the attention her eyes finding Marcus immediately. She sat down across from him without ordering anything. Thank you for coming. You made it sound important. It is. She folded her hands on the table, and Marcus noticed she wasn't wearing any rings. No jewelry at all except small diamond studs that probably cost more than his truck. I need to be direct with you, Marcus. I don't have time to be anything else. Okay, my board of directors wants me married. They believe it will provide stability to the company, ensure succession planning, and frankly, make me easier to control. Her voice was matter-of-fact, like she was discussing quarterly earnings instead of her own life. They've given me 6 months to find a suitable candidate, or they'll proceed with a vote of no confidence. Marcus leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking slightly under his weight. That's insane. That's business. No, that's control. That's people treating you like a commodity. Welcome to my world. She pulled a thin folder from her briefcase and slid it across the table. I've been presented with several candidates. All of them are from appropriate backgrounds. All of them see marriage as a business transaction. All of them are exactly what the board wants. Marcus didn't open the folder, just looked at the manila surface like it might bite him. So why are you telling me this? Victoria met his eyes, and he saw something there he hadn't seen before. Determination mixed with desperation, a woman backed into a corner and coming out swinging. Because I have a different idea. A better idea, one that serves my interests rather than theirs, which is, I want to hire you. The words hung in the air between them. Somewhere in the coffee shop, an espresso machine hissed and gurgled. Someone laughed at a nearby table. Normal sounds in a normal place while Victoria Sterling proposed something completely abnormal. Hire me, Marcus repeated the words slowly, tasting them, trying to make them make sense. To do what? Build you a deck to marry me. He stared at her, waiting for the punchline, waiting for her to laugh and say she was joking. But Victoria's expression remained completely serious. Her eyes locked on his with an intensity that made it clear she meant every word. You're not kidding, I'm not kidding. You want to hire me to marry you? Yes. Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor loud enough that several people looked over. He lowered his voice, leaning forward with his hands on the table. That's insane. That's actually insane. Sit down, please. It wasn't a command this time. It was a request, and something in her voice made him pause. Let me explain. Against his better judgment, against every instinct screaming that this was madness. Marcus sat back down. Victoria leaned forward, her voice low and urgent, meant only for him. The board wants me to marry someone they approve of. Someone who fits their profile, who will give them more control over how I run the company. But the contract doesn't specify who I have to marry. Just that I have to marry someone within 6 months and produce an heir within 5 years. She paused, letting that sink in. I choose you. Why me? You don't even know me. I know enough. I know you're honest. I know you're not impressed by money or power. I know you can't be bought or manipulated because you don't want anything from me. She pulled out another sheet of paper, this one covered in numbers that made Marcus's vision blur. And I know that you need money. Everyone needs money. So I'm offering you $50 million. Marcus felt the air leave his lungs. 50. What 50 million? He couldn't process the number, couldn't make his brain wrap around that many zeros. $50 million, paid out over the term of our arrangement. We get married, satisfy the board's requirements, maintain appearances for 3 years. After that, we divorce quietly. You walk away with the full amount tax-free, set up in a trust that can't be touched. This is insane. This is business. This is fraud. It's a contract. Everything will be legal, notarized, binding. You'll have your own attorneys review it, your own accountants. I'll pay for all of that. Victoria's voice remained steady, but Marcus could hear the urgency underneath the desperation of a woman running out of options. 3 years of your life, Marcus. 3 years of attending some events, taking some photos, playing a role. In exchange, you set up your daughter for life. College fund, trust fund, a house, security, everything. Marcus's hands had started shaking. He pressed them flat against the table, trying to ground himself in something solid. I can't believe we're having this conversation. I can't believe I'm in a position to have it. She slid the contract closer to him, a thick document that represented more money than he'd see in 10 lifetimes. But here we are. I'm not asking you to decide right now. I'm asking you to think about it. Read the contract. Ask questions. This isn't romantic, and I'm not pretending it is. This is a business arrangement that benefits both of us. What about what you said the other night, about not knowing what you want, about being tired of performances? Something flickered across Victoria's face. Pain, maybe, or regret. What I want and what I can have are two different things. I learned that a long time ago. So you're just going to what? Hire a husband instead of finding one. I don't have time to find one. I don't have the luxury of romance or courtship or whatever fairy tale you think exists. Her voice hardened, walls going back up. This is the hand I've been dealt, Marcus. I'm playing it the best way I know how. Marcus stood up again, this time grabbing the folder and the contract. I need to think, of course. Take your time. You have my number. He started to leave, then turned back. Can I ask you something? Anything. Why that night at the restaurant? If you knew I wasn't your date, why did you sit down? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her composure cracking just slightly at the edges. Because for 2 hours I got to be someone else. Someone who could have a normal conversation over dinner. Someone who didn't have to calculate every word. She looked up at him, and Marcus saw the loneliness there, the weight of all those years of careful control. And I wanted to see if that person still existed somewhere inside me. Does she? I don't know. Maybe that's why I'm here. Marcus left without another word, the contract burning a hole in his jacket pocket. Outside, the evening rush was in full swing, crowds of people heading home from work, street vendors, selling pretzels and hot dogs, taxis, honking in an eternal symphony of impatience. Nothing about this was normal. He made it 3 blocks before he had to stop and lean against a building, trying to process what just happened. $50 million. $50 million. He couldn't even really comprehend that number. It was more money than he'd make in 10 lifetimes doing construction. More money than he'd ever imagined having. Money that could change everything for Sophie. He pulled out his phone and called the one person whose judgment he trusted more than his own. She answered on the second ring. Marcus, what's wrong? I need to talk to you. Lisa Matthews lived in Brooklyn with her husband and 2 kids. She'd been Sarah's big sister, protective and practical and completely no nonsense. After Sarah died, Lisa had been there for everything. Helping with Sophie, talking Marcus down from ledges, being the voice of reason when everything felt impossible. Come over. I'll make coffee. An hour later, Marcus sat at Lisa's kitchen table while her kids did homework in the next room, and her husband Mike made himself scarce. Lisa had read through the contract twice, her expression growing more incredulous with each page. This is real. I know. She's offering you $50 million to marry her for 3 years. I know, Lisa. She set down the contract and looked at him. Really looked at him, seeing past the confusion to the conflict underneath. Do you understand what this kind of money would mean? Of course I do. No, I mean really understand. Lisa leaned forward, her voice intense. This isn't just about you. This is about Sophie's future. College anywhere she wants. No student loans, no debt. A house, security. Everything Sarah wanted for her. Marcus's throat tightened at the mention of his wife, at the invocation of her dreams and hopes for their daughter. Don't what? Point out the obvious? Lisa's voice softened slightly, but her words remained sharp. Sarah died worrying about whether you'd be okay, whether Sophie would have what she needed. This could solve all of that. By lying, by pretending, by providing. Lisa's voice turned gentle but firm. Marcus, I love you. You're the best father I know. But how long can you keep doing this, working 12-hour days, barely scraping by one emergency away from disaster? I'm doing fine. You're surviving. That's not the same thing as being fine. She tapped the contract, the sound loud in the quiet kitchen. This woman is offering you a chance to do more than survive, to actually build something. And all you have to do is play a role for 3 years. It's not that simple. Why not? Marcus couldn't answer. How could he explain the knot in his stomach? The feeling that accepting this money would mean betraying something fundamental about who he was, the memory of Sarah's voice saying he was the most honest man she'd ever known, and how that honesty felt like the only thing he had left of her. Lisa watched him struggle, then sighed. What are you afraid of? I don't know. His hands clenched into fists on the table. Maybe that I'll take the money and hate myself. Maybe that Sophie will grow up thinking that's how the world works. Everything's transactional. Nothing's real. Or maybe she'll grow up secure and loved and able to chase her dreams because her father made a hard choice to give her opportunities he never had. Lisa reached across the table and took his hand. There's no perfect answer here, Marcus. There's just what you can live with. That night, back in his apartment, with Sophie asleep in the next room, Marcus spread the contract out on his kitchen table and read it again. Every clause, every condition, every carefully worded paragraph that spelled out exactly what Victoria expected from this arrangement. The financial terms were staggering. $10 million upfront placed in escrow. The remaining $40 million paid out over 3 years with bonuses for meeting certain milestones. Public appearances, charity events, positive press coverage. After 3 years, an amicable divorce with generous ongoing support if there was a child. If there was a child. Marcus stopped at that clause, reading it again. The contract specified they would make reasonable efforts to conceive an heir, but stopped short of requiring it. Victoria had built in and out, both of them had. He wondered if she'd done that intentionally, if somewhere beneath all that calculated planning she'd left herself a back door to remain human. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. I know this is overwhelming. I know what I'm asking is extraordinary. But I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate. And I wouldn't ask you if I didn't believe you were someone who could be trusted with something this important. Please think about it. The message was signed simply with V. Marcus stared at the text for a long time. Then he got up and went to check on Sophie. She was sprawled across her bed, one arm hanging off the side, her hair a dark tangle across the pillow. In sleep, she looked so much like Sarah, it hurt a physical ache in his chest that never quite went away. He thought about the conversation they'd had last week, about the aquarium for her birthday, about how she'd asked and he'd said they'd see, and how she'd understood what that meant, how she'd learned at 7 years old to manage her expectations because she understood they didn't have money for extras. What kind of father let his daughter learn that lesson at 7? Marcus pulled out his phone and typed a message before he could second-guess himself. I have questions. A lot of questions. Can we meet again? The response came immediately. Tomorrow, my office noon. I'll take the subway. Of course you will. See you tomorrow. November 14th arrived gray and cold, the kind of day that promised winter was coming, whether anyone was ready or not. Marcus called in a personal day, the first he'd taken in 6 months, and spent 2 hours getting ready. He didn't have a suit, but he had a clean button-down shirt and his least worn jeans. He shaved carefully, tried to fix his hair, attempted to look like someone who belonged in a billionaire's office. It didn't really work, but it was the best he could do. Sterling Industries occupied floors 40 through 50 of a glass tower in Midtown. The lobby alone was more impressive than most buildings Marcus had worked on. Marble floors, a waterfall wall, security guards who looked like they'd been recruited from the Secret Service. He gave his name at the desk. The guard checked his list, made a call, then directed Marcus to a private elevator that required a key card to operate. Miss Sterling is expecting you. 42nd floor. The elevator was absurdly fast, making Marcus's ears pop. When the doors opened, he stepped into a reception area that looked like it belonged in a museum. Original art on the walls, furniture that was probably older than he was, a receptionist who smiled with professional warmth. Mr. Cole, Miss Sterling is ready for you. Right this way. She led him through a maze of offices and conference rooms, past employees, who all seemed to move with purpose and efficiency. Everyone he passed looked polished professional, like they'd been cast for a corporate drama. Victoria's office was at the end of a long hallway. The receptionist knocked once, then opened the door. Mr. Cole, ma'am. Thank you, Jennifer. The office was enormous, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Manhattan, a desk that could have doubled as a landing strip, sitting areas that suggested Victoria held entire meetings in here. But what struck Marcus wasn't the size or the luxury, it was how impersonal it felt. No photos, no mementos, nothing that suggested a human being actually worked here. Victoria stood by the windows, backlit by the afternoon sun. She'd traded yesterday's suit for a navy dress and heels that added 3 inches to her height. She looked every inch the billionaire CEO. Thank you for coming. She gestured to a sitting area where leather chairs probably cost more than his monthly rent. Please. An assistant appeared with coffee and pastries, then vanished like a ghost. Victoria waited until they were alone before speaking. So, questions. Marcus pulled out a notebook, actual paper, which felt absurdly low-tech in this space. I have about 100 of them. Start anywhere. The money. How do I know it's real? Victoria pulled out a tablet, tapped a few times, then turned it to show him a bank statement, an account with his name on it, a balance that made Marcus's vision blur. $10 million. That's the escrow account. It's already funded. Your attorneys will have access to verify it. If you sign the contract, it becomes yours immediately. She set down the tablet. Next question. What exactly would this look like day to day? You'd move into my apartment. We'd maintain separate bedrooms initially, but share common spaces. We'd attend events together. Charity galas, company, functions, family dinners. We'd be photographed together, interviewed together. To the outside world, we'd be a married couple. And behind closed doors, whatever we agree to. I'm not asking for romance, Marcus. I'm asking for partnership. Someone I can trust not to betray me. What about Sophie? For the first time, Victoria's professional demeanor cracked slightly. Sophie would be part of this. There's a bedroom for her in the apartment. Private school tuition is covered. She'd have access to everything. Tutors, activities, whatever she needs. You'd be her stepmother. Legally. Yes. Have you ever spent time with a child? Victoria's honesty was immediate and stark. No. Marcus appreciated the truth at least. Sophie's 7. She asks about a million questions. She doesn't sit still. She has opinions about everything. I've run board meetings with men who act the same way. Victoria's mouth twitched almost a smile. I think I can handle it. This isn't a joke. I'm not joking. She leaned forward and Marcus could see the sincerity in her eyes, the genuine attempt to understand what he was asking. Marcus, I understand this is your daughter's life we're talking about. I understand the weight of that responsibility. I would never ask you to put her in a situation that wasn't safe or healthy, but you'd ask me to lie to wish her. I'd ask you to give her opportunities she wouldn't otherwise have. How you frame that to her is your decision. Marcus made a note in his notebook, though he wasn't sure what he was writing anymore. The words blurred together, meaningless symbols representing impossible choices. What happens if one of us wants out before the 3 years? There's a termination clause. Either party can exit the contract with 90 days notice. You keep whatever money has already been distributed, prorated for time served. No penalties, no lawsuits. That seems too easy. It's in my interest to make this as clean as possible. Messy divorces destroy value. I'd rather part as friends than enemies. We're not friends, not yet. Victoria picked up her coffee cup, studying him over the rim. But I think we could be. That night at the restaurant, that was real. The conversation we had was real. I think we could build something functional out of that. Functional. Marcus repeated the word, tasting the clinical coldness of it. That's what you want. A functional marriage. It's more than most people in my world have. He couldn't argue with that logic, which somehow made it worse. What about your father? Your board. Do they know you're planning this? They know I'm pursuing marriage candidates. They don't know which one I've chosen. That announcement would come after you sign. They'll never accept me. They don't have to accept you. They just have to accept that you're my legal husband. Victoria set down her cup with careful precision. Besides, you underestimate yourself. You're honest, hardworking, devoted to your daughter. Those are qualities even my father can't criticize without looking like a hypocrite. Your father is going to hate me. My father hates everyone. Don't take it personally. Marcus stood up, too restless to sit anymore. He walked to the windows, looking out at the city, spreading in every direction like a living organism. All those people going about their lives, none of them facing a decision like this. I grew up in Queens. My dad worked construction. My mom cleaned houses. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with thin walls and radiators that only worked half the time. He turned to look at Victoria, needing her to understand this fundamental truth. I know what I am. I know where I come from. And I know that your world is not my world. That's precisely why this works. How? Because you're not corrupted by it yet. Because you still have values that can't be purchased. Because when you look at me, you see a person instead of a net worth. She stood as well, moving to stand beside him at the window, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive. I need someone like that, Marcus. Someone who can't be bought or manipulated. Someone who will tell me the truth even when it's inconvenient. Because everyone around me lies. They stood there in silence, two people from completely different worlds, looking out at the same city from very different vantage points. I need time. I need to think about this. Really think about it. How much time? A week, maybe 2. Victoria's jaw tightened. She clearly didn't like waiting, every instinct probably screaming at her to close the deal, to get commitment, to lock things down. 2 weeks. After that, I'll need an answer. The board is getting impatient. Fair enough. Marcus turned to leave, then stopped, one more question burning in his mind. Can I ask you something else? Of course. That night at the restaurant, the reservation in my name. That wasn't an accident, was it? Victoria's expression remained neutral, but he saw something flicker in her eyes. Calculation. Decision. How much truth to share? I don't know what you mean. I think you do. Someone put my name in that system. Someone made sure I'd be at that table when you arrived. He stepped closer, close enough to see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the slight tension in her jaw. Was it you? Why would I do that? I don't know. That's why I'm asking. Victoria held his gaze for a long moment, and Marcus saw her calculating, deciding how much truth to share versus how much to keep locked away behind those careful walls. Finally, she spoke. After you left that night, I thought about you, about our conversation, And I started to wonder what kind of man walks into the wrong restaurant and handles it with that much grace. She paused, letting the admission settle between them. So I had someone look into you, find out who you were. And what I found was interesting. A widower, a single father, an honest man trying to do right by his daughter. Another pause heavier than the first. I didn't plan what happened at Aurelius, but I did plan what came after. You investigated me. I did my due diligence. The same thing I do with any potential business partner. I'm not a business partner. I'm a person. You're both. That's what makes this complicated. Victoria's voice softened slightly, a crack in the armor. I'm sorry if that feels invasive, but I needed to know if you were someone I could trust, and everything I learned told me you were. Marcus shook his head, torn between anger and something else he couldn't quite name. Flattery maybe that she'd thought about him at all, or fear at how thoroughly she'd apparently researched his life before making this insane proposal. I don't know if that makes this better or worse. It makes it honest, which is more than most business arrangements can claim. He left without responding, his mind spinning with questions and calculations and the weight of a decision that would change everything. The 2 weeks that followed were the longest of Marcus's life. He had the contract reviewed by 3 different attorneys, all paid for by Victoria as promised. Each one told him the same thing. It was airtight, legitimate, and the most financially advantageous agreement they'd ever seen. One lawyer, a woman in her 60s who'd been practicing family law for 40 years, looked at him over her reading glasses and delivered her verdict with brutal honesty. Take it. Whatever moral reservations you have, $50 million will cure them. But that was the problem. Marcus wasn't sure they would. He ran the numbers obsessively late into the night while Sophie slept. With $50 million, even conservatively invested, he'd never have to work another day. Sophie could go to any college in the world. They could travel, see everything Sarah had always wanted to see, but never got the chance. He could set up a foundation in her name, help other families dealing with medical debt and loss. The possibilities were endless and overwhelming, and they all hinged on one decision. Could he marry a woman he barely knew for money? Lisa called him every other day, each time more insistent, her practical nature warring with his stubborn principles. Frank at the construction site had noticed his distraction, pulling him aside one morning with genuine concern. Whatever's eating at you, Reed, figure it out soon. Can't have you spacing out around heavy machinery. Even Mrs. Patterson had picked up on something when he dropped Sophie off one evening, her kind eyes seeing more than he wanted to reveal. You seem troubled. Big decision. The biggest. Then take your time. Big decisions made too fast are usually the wrong ones. On day 13, Marcus's phone rang at 6 in the morning. He answered groggy, expecting it to be the site foreman, calling about an early start. Mr. Cole, this is Jennifer from Miss Sterling's office. I'm calling to inform you that Miss Sterling will be out of town for the next few days on urgent business. She wanted you to know that your deadline is extended until she returns. Extended until when? We're not certain yet. I'll be in touch. The call ended before Marcus could ask any questions. He lay there in bed, staring at his ceiling, with its water stain that looked like South America, and felt something unexpected. Disappointment. He'd been gearing up to give her an answer, had spent the last week preparing himself mentally for whatever decision he was going to make. And now the deadline had moved, pushed back into some uncertain future, and it felt like watching a wave build only to have it dissipate before reaching shore. 3 days later, November 23rd, Marcus was working on a residential renovation in Brooklyn when his phone buzzed with a news alert. He almost ignored it like he usually did, but something made him look. The headline made his blood run cold. Sterling Industries CEO faces board revolt. Emergency meeting called to discuss leadership change. He clicked through to the article, reading quickly, while his crew worked around him, hammering and sawing and shouting instructions to each other in English and Spanish. Sources close to Sterling Industries confirmed that the board of directors has called an emergency meeting to discuss a vote of no confidence in CEO Victoria Sterling. The meeting, scheduled for Friday, comes amid growing concerns about Sterling's leadership and her failure to comply with succession planning requirements set forth by the board 18 months ago. If the vote succeeds, it would effectively remove Sterling from her position as CEO, making her the first Sterling family member to lose control of the company in its 80-year history. Marcus read the article 3 times, each time feeling the weight of it more heavily. This was why Victoria had left town. The board had moved up their timeline, and she was scrambling to respond. And he was the response she'd been counting on. His phone rang. Victoria. He stepped away from the work site to answer. Did you see the news? Her voice was tight controlled, but he could hear the stress underneath like a wire pulled taut enough to snap. Just now, the board moved faster than I expected. They're calling the vote for Friday. That gives me less than 48 hours. A pause, and he could hear her breathing, could almost see her standing somewhere with perfect posture and clenched fists. Marcus, I need an answer. I know I said you could have more time, but I don't have more time to give. The board wants me to show up to that meeting with a fiancé, or they're voting me out. She took a breath, steadying herself. So I'm asking, will you help me or not? I need to meet with you. In person. I'm in Boston. I can be back in New York by tonight. Where your apartment? 8 o'clock. I'll send you the address. The address she sent was in Tribeca, in a building Marcus had walked past 100 times, but never imagined entering. The doorman checked his name against the list, then directed him to a private elevator that required both a key card and a fingerprint scan. Penthouse level. Miss Sterling is expecting you. The elevator opened directly into Victoria's apartment, and for a moment Marcus just stood there trying to process what he was seeing. The space was enormous, 3,000 square feet at least, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the Hudson River and the city lights beyond. Everything was pristine, modern, expensive. The furniture looked like it belonged in a design magazine. The art on the walls was museum quality, and it was completely, utterly soulless. There were no photos, no personal touches, no indication that anyone actually lived here beyond the most basic necessities. It was a showroom, not a home, a place to impress visitors rather than a space to inhabit. Victoria appeared from another room wearing jeans and a sweater, the most casual he'd ever seen her. Her hair was down and she looked tired in a way that made her seem more human than the polished CEO he'd met in her office. Thank you for coming. She gestured to the living room, to a couch that probably cost more than his truck. Can I get you something to drink? I'm fine. They sat on opposite ends of the expensive couch, the distance between them feeling both necessary and vast. I have my answer. Marcus's voice was steady despite the way his heart was hammering against his ribs. Okay. Victoria's hands tightened on her knees, bracing herself for whatever was coming. But first I need to understand something. Why me really? You could hire anyone for this. An actor, a model, someone who's trained to play roles. Someone from your world who understands how these things work. Why a construction worker from Queens with a 7-year-old daughter? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the river beyond the windows, on the boats moving through the dark water, like small stars drifting across a liquid sky. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. Because everyone in my world is playing an angle. Everyone wants something. Money, connections, status, power. I can't trust any of them because I never know what their real agenda is. She turned to look at him, and in the dim light of her sterile apartment, she looked younger, somehow more vulnerable. But you, that night at the restaurant, you didn't want anything from me. You were just present, honest, real. And I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd had a conversation with someone who wasn't trying to manipulate me or use me or position themselves for some future advantage. So you decided to hire me to manipulate you. Instead, I decided to hire someone I could trust to be exactly who they are. No hidden agendas, no secret plays for power. She shifted to face him more fully, and Marcus could see the desperation in her eyes, the fear of a woman who'd built her entire identity around a company and was watching it slip away. I need someone who will tell me the truth, Marcus, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, because everyone around me lies. My board, my father, my so-called friends. They all tell me what they think I want to hear or what serves their purposes. I need someone who won't do that. You need a moral compass. I need a partner who remembers I'm human. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a tectonic plate of understanding, moving beneath his carefully constructed resolve. This wasn't just about satisfying a board requirement or maintaining control of a company. This was about a woman who'd spent so long being treated as an asset that she'd almost forgotten how to be a person. I've thought about your offer. I've run every number, considered every angle, talked to lawyers and accountants and people I trust, and the math makes sense. The contract is solid. The money would change my life and Sophie's life and in ways I can barely comprehend. But Victoria's voice was barely a whisper, already bracing for rejection. But I keep coming back to the same question. What does it buy, not in money, but in everything else? My integrity, my values, the promise I made to Sarah that I'd raise our daughter to know the difference between right and wrong. He leaned forward, needing her to understand this. I've been poor my whole life, Victoria. I know what it's like to count pennies, to choose between paying the electric bill or buying groceries to tell my daughter we can't afford something she wants. And I've hated every minute of it. Then take the money, let me finish. Marcus's voice was gentle but firm. I've been poor and it's been hard, but I've never been dishonest. I've never lied about who I am or what I believe in. And I don't know if I can start now, even for $50 million. Victoria's face had gone very still, frozen in that moment, before breaking, before the carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. So your answer is no. My answer is, I need you to understand what you're asking. You're not just asking me to play a role or sign a contract. You're asking me to build my daughter's future on a lie, to teach her that everything has a price, including integrity. And I don't know if I can do that, even if it means she has opportunities I never had. Even then, Marcus ran his hands through his hair, frustration and sorrow mixing into something that felt like grief. My dad used to tell me that the easiest thing in the world is to compromise your values. The hard thing is figuring out how to live without doing it. And maybe I'm a fool for turning down this kind of money. But I can't shake the feeling that if I take it, I lose something I can never get back. Victoria stood abruptly and walked to the windows. For a long moment, she just stood there, her reflection ghostly in the glass, her shoulders rigid with tension. You're going to say no. She said it quietly, like speaking it aloud would make it real. After everything, after all of this, you're actually going to say no. I came here to tell you that I can't do this, that I'm sorry, but I can't be what you need, can't or won't. Does it matter? Yes. She spun to face him, and there was something fierce and desperate in her expression. A woman watching everything she'd built crumble and reaching for anything to stop the collapse. It matters because can't means it's impossible and won't means you're choosing not to. So which is it, Marcus? He stood as well, meeting her intensity with his own quiet certainty, the calm that came from knowing he was making the right choice, even if it was the hard one. Won't. I'm choosing not to. Why give me one good reason why you'd turn down $50 million? Because it's not about the money. He took a step closer, close enough to see the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of all those years of fighting and compromising and trying to be enough for everyone except herself. It was never about the money. What you're proposing isn't a partnership. It's not even really a marriage. It's a business transaction dressed up in wedding vows. And you're so deep in your corporate world that you can't see how sad that is. Victoria's eyes flashed with anger, with hurt, with something raw and unguarded. Don't you dare judge me. You have no idea what my life is like. You're right, I don't. Marcus kept his voice steady, refusing to match her anger with his own. But I know what it looks like from the outside. And it looks lonely. It looks like you've convinced yourself that everything worth having can be bought or negotiated or contracted. And maybe in your world that's true, but it's not true in mine. So what you are going to go back to your tiny apartment and your minimum wage job and feel morally superior because you turned down the chance to actually help your daughter. The words were meant to sting, and they did, landing like blows against his ribs. I'm going to go back to my daughter and look her in the eye and know that I didn't sell out everything I believe in. Marcus met her anger with something softer, something like compassion. And yeah, maybe that makes me an idiot. Maybe 20 years from now, I'll regret this decision. But at least I'll be able to live with myself. You self-righteous Victoria bit off the word, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. You have no idea what you're throwing away. I have every idea. That's why it's hard. They stood there facing each other across her immaculate living room, across the divide of wealth and class, and all the choices that had brought them to this moment. Two people from different worlds who'd almost found a way to bridge the gap. Almost. Victoria's phone buzzed on the table between them. She glanced at it, and something in her face changed. Hardened. Resigned. That's my attorney. The board meeting has been moved up to tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. She looked at Marcus, and he could see the defeat in her eyes, the acceptance of what was coming. So this is it. This is where you walk away, and I lose everything, Victoria. The word came out softer than he intended, carrying more weight than a name should bear. Don't. Just don't. She turned back to the window, her reflection staring out at the city that had always been hers until now. You should go. Marcus wanted to say something, anything to make this better. But what could he say? That he was sorry, that he wished things were different, that in another life, another world, maybe they could have found a real partnership instead of a contractual one. All of it was true and none of it mattered. He walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and waited. Behind him, he could hear Victoria's breathing, careful and controlled, like she was fighting to maintain composure. The elevator doors opened. Marcus. He turned. Victoria was still facing the window, her reflection visible in the glass. That night at the restaurant. Those 2 hours. That was real, wasn't it? It wasn't just me imagining it. It was real, then why isn't that enough? Victoria's voice broke slightly on the last word, a crack in the foundation. Because real doesn't mean right. The elevator doors closed and Marcus descended back to ground level, back to his world, back to his life. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with a notification. He pulled it out to find a message from Victoria. The escrow account will be closed tomorrow. The money was real, even if nothing else was. I'm sorry I wasted your time. Marcus stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. He walked out into the Tribeca night, past the galleries and boutiques and restaurants he'd never be able to afford, and headed for the subway that would take him back to Queens. He'd just turned down $50 million. He felt sick and relieved and terrified all at once, like he'd stepped off a cliff and didn't know yet whether he'd fall or fly. The next morning, Marcus made Sophie chocolate chip pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, a ritual reserved for special occasions or difficult days. She ate them enthusiastically, chattering about the field trip her class was taking next week to the Natural History Museum. Can you come with us? Some of the other parents are coming. I'll have to check with work, but I'll try. You always try. That usually means no. The observation hit harder than it should have a 7-year-old's clear-eyed assessment of their limitations. I know, baby. I'm sorry. It's okay. I know you have to work. She took another bite of pancake syrup, coating her fingers. Did you decide about the lady? The one with the nice apartment? He'd almost forgotten he'd mentioned Victoria to her, trying to explain in child-appropriate terms why he'd been so distracted. Yeah, I decided. And Marcus set down his spatula, looking at his daughter, whose wisdom sometimes terrified him. We're staying here. Just the two of us. Like always. Sophie studied his face with those two perceptive eyes. Are you sad about it? A little bit. Why? How did he explain this? How did he tell a 7-year-old that sometimes the right choice doesn't feel good? It just feels necessary. Because sometimes doing the right thing doesn't make you happy. It just makes you right. I don't understand. Someday you will. He ruffled her hair, trying to lighten the moment. Finish your pancakes. You're going to be late for school. After dropping Sophie at school, Marcus headed to the construction site, trying to focus on work, trying not to think about what was happening in a boardroom somewhere in Midtown. Trying not to imagine Victoria facing down her board of directors alone without the fiancé she'd needed to prove she was taking their demands seriously. It wasn't his problem anymore. He'd made his choice. Around 11 in the morning, Frank called him over to the site office. Reed, you got a visitor? Marcus looked up from the wall he was framing. Confused. What man in a suit? Fancy looking. Says he needs to talk to you. When Marcus walked into the makeshift office, it wasn't Victoria waiting for him. It was a man in his 60s, silver-haired and imposing, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Marcus made in 6 months. He had Victoria's eyes, that same calculating intelligence, but none of her warmth. Mr. Cole, I'm William Sterling, Victoria's father. Marcus felt his defenses go up immediately, every instinct screaming that this conversation wouldn't go well. Mr. Sterling, I'll get straight to the point. I know about my daughter's proposal to you, and I know you turned her down. That's between me and Victoria. Under normal circumstances, I'd agree. William pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, then showed Marcus the screen. It was a news article posted 20 minutes ago. Breaking: Victoria Sterling stepping down as CEO of Sterling Industries. Marcus felt like he'd been punched in the gut. She resigned. She was given a choice. Resign voluntarily or face a vote she was guaranteed to lose. She chose to maintain some dignity. William pocketed his phone, his expression cold. The board meeting ended an hour ago. My daughter is no longer in control of the company her grandfather built. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to understand what you did. William's voice was ice, each word carefully chosen to cut. My daughter came to you with a solution. Admittedly, an unconventional one, but a solution nonetheless. You could have helped her maintain control. Could have given her the time and stability she needed to outmaneuver the board. Instead, you let your moral superiority get in the way. Marcus's jaw tightened. I made the choice I could live with. How noble. William's laugh was bitter. Meanwhile, my daughter just lost everything. 3,000 employees are going to lose their jobs when the new CEO restructures. The sustainable technology projects Victoria championed will be scrapped in favor of more profitable ventures. Decades of progress will be undone. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to something dangerous. But at least you get to keep your integrity intact. The words hit harder than Marcus wanted to admit, burrowing under his skin like splinters he couldn't dig out. That's not fair. Fair Williams' expression twisted into something ugly. Nothing about this is fair, Mr. Cole. But you had a chance to make it less unfair, and you chose not to. I hope your principles keep you warm at night. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, I think Victoria was right about you. You're exactly the kind of honest, principled man she needed, which makes it all the more tragic that those same principles destroyed her. After William left, Marcus stood in the site office for a long time, his hands shaking. Around him, the construction site continued its normal rhythm, hammers pounding saws, buzzing men calling to each other in languages he understood and didn't. He pulled out his phone and called the number he had been trying not to think about. Victoria answered on the first ring. Marcus, I just met your father. I know. I told him not to go see you. Is it true? Did you resign? A pause long enough that he could hear her breathing on the other end. Yes, Victoria. Don't apologize. You made your choice. I respect it. Her voice was steady, controlled, professional. The CEO mask firmly back in place. Even if I don't understand it, I didn't know it would be this bad. How could you? I didn't tell you the full extent of what was at stake. I was trying to manipulate you with money. A pause heavier than the last. I didn't think you'd respond to anything else. What would you have told me if you thought I'd listen? Victoria's laugh was hollow. The truth, that Sterling Industries isn't just a company. It's a legacy, a responsibility. The only thing I've ever been good at. That losing it doesn't just mean losing power or status. It means failing everyone who believed in me. Everyone who trusted me to do better than the generation before. Another pause. But you wouldn't have cared about that either. Why would you? It's not your problem. Where are you? Does it matter? Just tell me. My office, cleaning out my desk. I'm coming there, Marcus. There's no point. He hung up before she could finish and told Frank he needed the rest of the day off. He didn't wait for approval, just headed for the subway, still wearing his work clothes, still covered in dust and sweat. The security guard at Sterling Industries looked at him with recognition this time. Mr. Cole, I'm afraid Miss Sterling is no longer. I know. I need to see her anyway. Sir, I can't just. Then call her. Tell her Marcus Cole is here, and he's not leaving until she sees him. The guard made the call, spoke quietly into his phone, then looked surprised. She says to send you up. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt longer this time, each floor ticking by with agonizing slowness. When the doors opened, the reception area was different. Boxes stacked everywhere. People moving with the frenetic energy of corporate chaos. The receptionist, Jennifer, looked haggard. Mr. Cole, she's in her office. The door was open. Inside, Victoria stood by those floor-to-ceiling windows, in the same position she'd been in last night, looking out at the city that had just chewed her up and spit her out. Her office was half-packed boxes, filled with personal items Marcus hadn't even realized she kept here. She didn't turn when he entered. You shouldn't have come. Your father ambushed me at my work site. I know, I'm sorry. He's angry and he's lashing out. Don't take it personally. He said 3,000 people are going to lose their jobs. Probably more. Victoria's voice was flat, emotionless, the careful control of someone who'd cried all their tears in private and had nothing left for public consumption. The new CEO is known for aggressive restructuring. The Sustainable Technology Division will be shuttered within 3 months. Everything I've built for the last 5 years, gone. Marcus moved to stand beside her at the window, looking out at the city, spreading below them like a circuit board, all those lives intersecting and diverging in patterns too complex to map. I didn't know it would be this bad. How could you? I didn't tell you the full extent of what was at stake. She finally turned to look at him and he saw the exhaustion in her face, the defeat written in every line. I was trying to manipulate you with money. I didn't think you'd respond to anything else. What would you have told me if you thought I'd listen? Victoria's composure cracked just for a moment, enough for him to see the pain underneath. The truth, that Sterling Industries isn't just a company, it's a legacy, a responsibility, and the only thing I've ever been good at. That losing it doesn't just mean losing power, it means failing everyone who believed in me. Everyone who trusted me to do better. She turned back to the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. But you were right to say no. You were right about all of it. Marcus didn't know what to say to that, to the acceptance in her voice that felt more like resignation than peace. Your father was wrong about one thing. He said my principles destroyed you, but you were already being destroyed, Victoria, by a system that treats people like commodities, by a board that cares more about profit margins than human beings, by a world that convinced you the only way to survive was to become as cold and calculating as everyone else. So what you came here to lecture me? No, Marcus turned to face her, fully needing her to see the sincerity in his eyes. I came here to tell you that I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't be what you needed. I'm sorry the world you live in is so broken that my saying no cost you everything. And I'm sorry that I don't have a solution because I'm just a construction worker from Queens. And this is way beyond anything I understand. Victoria's composure finally broke. Her eyes filled with tears that she blinked back furiously, fighting to maintain control, even as it slipped through her fingers. Then why are you here? Because I couldn't let you think I didn't care. Because that conversation we had at the restaurant was real. And you deserve to know that it mattered, that you matter. He reached out hesitantly, then pulled her into a hug. For a moment, she resisted, her body rigid with pride and pain. Then she broke her arms, wrapping around him, her face pressed against his shoulder, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. They stood like that for a long time, two people who'd almost found a way to save each other and failed. Around them, the city continued its indifferent business, and life moved forward the way it always did, caring nothing for individual tragedies or small human moments of connection. When Victoria finally pulled back, she wiped her eyes and tried to compose herself, tried to rebuild the walls that had crumbled. I look terrible. You look human. She laughed, a real laugh this time, though still tinged with sadness. I suppose that's something. What happens now, I don't know. Victoria walked to her desk, touching the surface like she was saying goodbye to an old friend. The board is installing their own CEO. I'll retain my shares and my seat on the board, but no real power. I'm being paid out my contract. Enough money that I'll never have to work again, which somehow makes it worse. She looked around her office at all the boxes and empty spaces. I have to be out of here by end of day. Where will you go? I honestly don't know. I've worked here for 12 years, lived in that apartment for 8. Everything in my life has been structured around this company. She met his eyes and he could see the fear there, the terror of someone whose entire identity had just been stripped away. I have no idea who I am without it. Marcus thought about that, about identity tied to occupation, to purpose, to the structures we build around ourselves to feel safe. Maybe that's not the worst thing. How do you figure? Because now you get to find out who you are when you're not performing. What you want when nobody's telling you what to want. He squeezed her hand, feeling the trembling in her fingers. It's terrifying, but it's also kind of freeing. Says the man who knows exactly who he is. I know who I've had to be. That's not the same thing. Marcus smiled slightly. We're both figuring it out, Victoria, just in different ways. She looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression, walls lowering just enough for possibility to slip through. I have a question. Okay, that little girl you video called at the restaurant, Sophie, would you let me meet her? Marcus was surprised, the request coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. What? Because you talk about her like she's the center of your universe. And I want to understand what that looks like. What it means to care about someone more than you care about money or power or any of this. She gestured at the office around them, at all the trappings of success that had just crumbled. I want to know if I'm capable of that. You are. You just haven't had the chance. Then give me one. Victoria's voice was almost pleading. Please let me meet her. Marcus considered it, this woman who'd lost everything, asking for a chance to see what actually mattered, what couldn't be bought or negotiated or contracted. There's a park near my apartment. We go there most Saturdays. You could meet us there. This Saturday, this Saturday. Victoria nodded, something like relief crossing her face. Thank you. 3 days later, November 23rd, Marcus and Sophie had claimed their usual spot on the benches near the playground in Astoria Park. The East River sparkled in the morning sun, and the sounds of children playing mixed with the distant hum of traffic on the Triborough Bridge. Sophie was showing him her latest drawing, something involving a princess riding a dragon, when Marcus spotted Victoria walking toward them across the grass. Is that her? Sophie asked, following his gaze. Yeah, that's her. She's pretty. Be nice. I'm always nice. Victoria looked different. Gone was the power suit and the perfectly styled hair. Instead, she wore jeans, a simple cream sweater, and sneakers that looked brand new, like she'd bought them specifically for this occasion. Her hair was in a ponytail, and she carried herself with less certainty than he'd ever seen, like she wasn't sure she belonged here. She looked nervous. Sophie hopped off the bench and stood beside Marcus, suddenly shy despite her earlier bravado. Victoria reached them and stopped a few feet away, like she wasn't sure how close to come. Hi. Hi, Victoria, this is Sophie. Sophie, this is Miss Sterling. You can call me Victoria. She crouched down to be at Sophie's eye level, a gesture Marcus appreciated, showing respect for his daughter as a person rather than just a child. It's nice to meet you, Sophie. Your dad has told me a lot about you. Sophie studied her with that intense 7-year-old stare that could make adults squirm. He told me about you, too. That you needed help with something, but he couldn't help you, and that you were sad about it. Victoria glanced up at Marcus, something unreadable in her expression, then looked back at Sophie. That's true, I was sad, but I'm feeling better now. Because you came to the park, because your dad is a good person. And good people make you feel better even when things are hard. Sophie seemed to accept this logic with the casual certainty of childhood. Do you want to see my dragon princess? I would love to see your dragon princess. For the next hour, Marcus watched something he never expected to see. Victoria Sterling, former CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, sitting cross-legged on a park bench, completely absorbed in a 7-year-old's artistic vision. Sophie explained in elaborate detail why the princess needed a dragon instead of a horse, why the dragon was purple instead of green, and why they were flying to a castle made entirely of ice cream. Victoria listened to all of it with the same intense focus she probably brought to board meetings, asking questions that showed she was genuinely paying attention, engaging with Sophie's imagination, rather than just humoring her. When Sophie finished her explanation, Victoria pulled out her phone. Can I show you something? She pulled up a photo of a young girl, maybe 10 years old, with dark hair and serious eyes, standing in front of an easel, holding a paintbrush. Is that you? It is. I used to paint when I was your age. My grandfather gave me that easel for my 10th birthday. What did you paint? Mostly buildings. I thought they were more serious than princesses and dragons. Victoria smiled sadly, looking at the photo like it was evidence of a crime she'd committed against herself. I wish I'd painted more princesses. It's not too late. Sophie delivered the words with the absolute certainty of a child who hadn't yet learned about regret or missed opportunities. You could paint them now. Maybe I will. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest, watching them, seeing his daughter cut through pretense and complication to reach the simple truth underneath. And the simple truth was that Victoria was lonely, tired, and desperately trying to figure out who she was without the armor she'd worn for so long. After a while, Sophie went to play on the swings with some other kids from her school, leaving Marcus and Victoria alone on the bench. Thank you for this, for letting me meet her. She likes you. She's being polite. She was raised well. No, she actually likes you. Trust me, when Sophie doesn't like someone, she makes it very clear. Marcus watched his daughter pump her legs on the swing, flying higher with each arc. She asked me last week if you were going to be her new mom. Victoria went very still beside him. What did you tell her? That it was complicated, that you were a friend who needed help, that sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices. He turned to look at her, needing her to understand. I didn't tell her about the money, about any of it. I wouldn't have expected you to. They sat in silence for a moment, watching Sophie play, watching other families enjoy the autumn morning. I've been thinking about what you said, about not knowing who I am without the company. Victoria's voice was quiet, almost vulnerable. And you were right. I spent my entire life being groomed to run Sterling Industries. Every decision, every relationship, every moment was about preparing me for that role. And now that it's gone, she trailed off, struggling to find words for something she'd never had to articulate before. I feel like I'm floating, untethered. I wake up in the morning and don't know what I'm supposed to do. What do you want to do? I don't know. That's the problem. She pulled her sweater tighter around herself, even though the day was relatively warm. Yesterday, I spent 3 hours at my apartment just staring at the walls. I couldn't even decide what to eat for breakfast. It's pathetic. It's not pathetic. It's adjustment. It's failure. No, Marcus's voice was firm. Failure would be giving up. This is just figuring out the next step. Victoria looked at him with those intelligent eyes, and he saw something vulnerable there that made his heart ache. I don't know how to do that. I've always had a plan, a strategy, a clear path forward. Now I have nothing. You have time. You have resources. You have the freedom to choose what comes next. He shifted to face her more fully. That's what terrifies me. What if I choose wrong, then you choose again? Marcus smiled slightly. Victoria, you're not defined by one company or one position. You're smart, capable, driven. You'll find something else that matters. But what if nothing else feels like it matters? Her voice cracked slightly, the first real break in her composure all morning. What if the company was the only thing I was good at? Before Marcus could answer, Sophie came running over, breathless and excited. Daddy, can Victoria come with us to get pizza? Please, Marcus looked at Victoria, raising an eyebrow in question. She looked startled, like she hadn't expected to be invited to continue the afternoon. I don't want to intrude. You're not intruding. Sophie's blunt honesty was refreshing. You look sad, and pizza makes everyone feel better. That's what Daddy says. Victoria's eyes met Marcus's over Sophie's head, and he saw the loneliness there, the desperate need for something normal and real. Pizza does make everyone feel better. Marcus kept his voice light. You should come. They went to Sal's, a tiny pizzeria 3 blocks from Marcus's apartment that had been there for 40 years and served the kind of pizza that made tourists weep with joy. The place was packed, as it always was on Saturdays, and they had to wait 20 minutes for a table. While they waited, Sophie peppered Victoria with questions about everything from her favorite color to whether she'd ever seen a real dragon to what kind of ice cream she liked. Victoria answered each question with surprising patience, and Marcus noticed she was starting to relax her shoulders, losing some of their tension, her smiles coming more easily. When they finally got a table wedged into a corner booth with red vinyl seats that had been patched with duct tape, Victoria looked around the cramped, noisy restaurant like she'd discovered a new planet. You come here often. Every Saturday, it's our tradition. The pizza is really good, Sophie added with serious authority. Even better than the fancy places with the weird toppings. I'll take your word for it. They ordered a large pizza, half pepperoni for Sophie and half mushroom for the adults. When it arrived, Victoria took her first bite with the same careful attention she probably brought to wine tasting at Michelin-starred restaurants. Her eyes widened. Oh, told you. Sophie was smug. This is really good. You sound surprised. Marcus laughed. I am. I thought the best pizza in the city was at Roberta's in Brooklyn. Roberta's is good if you want to pay $30 for something artisanal. Sal's is good if you want actual pizza. He took another slice. There's a difference. They ate and talked, or mostly Sophie talked, while Marcus and Victoria listened. She told Victoria about school, about her best friend Emma, who could do a handstand, about the field trip to the Natural History Museum that Marcus still hadn't figured out if he could attend. Victoria listened to all of it with the same focused attention, occasionally asking questions that showed she was genuinely interested rather than just being polite. At one point, Sophie excused herself to go to the bathroom, leaving Marcus and Victoria alone at the table. She's amazing. You've done an incredible job with her. I'm just trying not to screw up too badly. You're doing more than that. Victoria picked at a piece of crust on her plate. She's confident, articulate, kind. She knows she's loved. That's everything. Her mother deserves most of the credit. She was the best of us. Tell me about her. If you don't mind. Marcus was surprised by the request, but he found he didn't mind at all. Maybe it was the casual setting, or maybe it was the way Victoria asked, genuinely wanting to know, rather than just making conversation. We met in college. I was there on scholarship, working 3 jobs to pay for what the scholarship didn't cover. She was pre-med, brilliant, way out of my league. He smiled at the memory, warmer than the pain for once. But she saw something in me I didn't even see in myself. Made me believe I could be more than what I came from. She sounds wonderful. She was. Marcus had to stop his throat tightening with familiar grief. And when she got sick, she fought so hard. Not for herself, for Sophie. She wanted to see her grow up. Wanted to be there for all the moments. He looked down at his hands at the wedding ring he still wore. When it became clear she wouldn't make it, she made me promise I'd never let Sophie forget her. That I'd tell her stories, show her photos, keep her memory alive. That's why you couldn't take my offer. Victoria's voice was quiet, understanding dawning. It wasn't just about integrity. It was about the promise you made to your wife. Partly. Marcus met her eyes. Sarah always said the most important thing we could give Sophie was honesty. A clear sense of right and wrong. Values that couldn't be compromised. He paused. How could I teach her that while building our future on a lie? Victoria nodded slowly, and he could see her processing this, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. I'm sorry for putting you in that position, for not understanding what I was really asking. You were desperate. I get it. That's not an excuse. No, but it's a reason. Marcus reached across the table and squeezed her hand. And for what it's worth, I think you're brave. Walking away from the company, trying to figure out who you are. That takes courage. I didn't walk away. I was pushed. But you're not fighting to get back in. You could be. You have the shares, the name, the connections. You could make their lives hell if you wanted to. Victoria looked down at their joined hands. Because maybe you were right. Maybe I need to figure out who I am without all of that. Maybe that's the only way forward. The following weeks settled into a pattern. Victoria would meet them at the park on Saturdays. Then they'd go to Sal's for pizza, sometimes hitting the arcade in the back, where Sophie would gleefully beat both adults at every game. Victoria changed during those weeks, the rigid CEO veneer, cracking and falling away like old paint, revealing someone softer underneath. Someone who laughed at Sophie's terrible jokes and wasn't afraid to get grass stains on her jeans. Someone who asked Marcus for advice about things that had nothing to do with business, what books to read, what movies to watch, how to cook something other than toast. One Saturday in mid-November, after they'd finished their pizza and Sophie had gone to play arcade games in the back, Victoria told Marcus about the call she'd gotten from her father. He wants me to come to Thanksgiving dinner, annual family gathering. Very formal, very awkward. She stirred her soda with her straw, not drinking it, just moving the ice around in circles. He says the new CEO will be there. Wants me to make nice show support, prove I'm not bitter about how things ended. Are you bitter furious? Victoria's honesty was immediate, but also relieved. Is that terrible? No. It's honest. I keep waiting to feel devastated, to miss it so much I can't function. But mostly I just feel lighter, like I've been carrying something heavy for so long, I forgot what it felt like to put it down. She looked at him, searching his face for judgment and finding none. Is that normal? I think you're allowed to feel however you feel. My therapist says the same thing. You're seeing a therapist, started 2 weeks ago. Turns out having your entire identity stripped away is something professionals recommend talking about. She smiled slightly, the first time he'd seen her smile about her situation. She's helpful, very into mindfulness and self-compassion, which feels weird but also kind of necessary. Good, I'm glad you're taking care of yourself. I'm trying. Victoria took a breath, gathering courage for something. I wanted to ask you something. The Thanksgiving dinner. Would you and Sophie want to come with me as my guest? Marcus was surprised. Victoria, that's a family event. We'd be intruding. You wouldn't be intruding. You'd be saving me from 3 hours of passive-aggressive small talk and pointed questions about my future. She reached across the table, her hand finding his. Please, I need people there who actually like me for me, not for what I used to be. He thought about stepping into the Sterling family world again, about exposing Sophie to that kind of wealth and dysfunction. But Victoria was asking, and there was something in her eyes that suggested this mattered more than she was letting on. Okay, we'll come. Relief flooded her face. Thank you. Fair warning, my family is a lot. Can't be worse than my extended family at Christmas. Uncle Joe gets drunk and starts lecturing everyone about conspiracy theories. My uncle does that too, except he's sober and he's talking about market manipulation. She squeezed his hand. This is going to be a disaster. Probably, but we'll get through it together. Thanksgiving arrived cold and gray with the promise of snow in the air. Marcus dressed Sophie in her nicest dress, a navy blue thing with white trim that Lisa had bought her for a wedding last year, and put on his only suit, which was slightly too tight in the shoulders and definitely out of style. Victoria picked them up in a car service and Marcus tried not to stare at her. She wore a burgundy dress that was elegant without being showy, her hair styled in a way that suggested professional help. She looked beautiful and nervous and like she was preparing for battle. The Sterling estate was in Connecticut, a 40-minute drive from the city. As they pulled up the long driveway, Sophie pressed her face against the window. Daddy, is that a house or a hotel? It's a house, baby. It's huge. The mansion was indeed huge, a sprawling colonial structure that probably had 20 bedrooms and staff quarters and rooms that existed for no purpose other than to impress visitors. I know it's excessive. Victoria's voice was tight. I grew up here and I still think it's too much. Where's your room, third floor, east wing? I haven't been in it since I moved out 12 years ago. My father turned it into a home gym. She said it matter-of-factly, but Marcus heard the hurt underneath the casual cruelty of a father who erased his daughter's childhood the moment she left. They were greeted at the door by staff in uniforms who took their coats and directed them to the drawing room where the family was gathering for pre-dinner drinks. Marcus held Sophie's hand tightly as they entered a room that looked like it belonged in a museum full of antique furniture and oil paintings and people who radiated old money. William Sterling stood by the fireplace talking to a man in his 50s who Marcus recognized from business news as the new CEO. When William spotted Victoria, his expression didn't change, remaining as cold and controlled as marble. Victoria, you made it, Father. Thank you for the invitation. Victoria's voice was cool, professional, matching his energy. I'd like you to meet my guests. This is Marcus Cole and his daughter Sophie. William's eyes swept over them, taking in Marcus's too tight suit and Sophie's wide-eyed wonder, and something dismissive flickered across his face. Mr. Cole, the construction worker. Day laborer, actually. Marcus kept his voice even. Nice to meet you, sir. Indeed. William turned back to Victoria, dismissing them with the efficiency of someone used to controlling conversations. I'm surprised you brought guests. You said I should bring anyone who makes me happy. Victoria's voice carried an edge sharp enough to cut. They make me happy. It was said as a challenge, and everyone in the room picked up on it, conversations, pausing heads turning to watch the drama unfold. The dinner was exactly as awkward as Victoria had predicted. 18 people around a table that could have seated 30, with multiple courses served by silent staff and conversation that felt like a verbal chess match. Marcus sat between Victoria and an aunt who spent 20 minutes explaining why her son's hedge fund was going to revolutionize investment banking. Sophie, to her credit, was perfect. She used the right fork, said please and thank you, and didn't ask uncomfortable questions. Even when William made pointed comments about Victoria's recent sabbatical from responsibility, but Marcus could feel the tension building in Victoria beside him, her shoulders getting tighter, with each passive-aggressive comment, each veiled criticism disguised as concern. It finally boiled over during dessert. William 3 glasses of wine and turned to Victoria with the casual cruelty of someone who'd spent a lifetime perfecting it. So, daughter, what are your plans? Surely you're not going to waste your education and experience doing nothing? I'm not doing nothing. I'm figuring out what I actually want. At 34, most people figure that out by 25. Most people aren't raised to subsume their entire identity into a family business. The table went quiet, the silence so complete that Marcus could hear the clink of silverware from the kitchen. Even the staff paused in their serving. William's jaw tightened, his face flushing slightly. Everything I did was to prepare you for success. Everything you did was to prepare me to be you. Victoria set down her fork with deliberate care, her voice steady, but her hands trembling. There's a difference, and I'm tired of pretending that was the same thing as love. Victoria, her mother started, but Victoria stood up, pushing her chair back with enough force that it scraped against the floor. Thank you for dinner. It was lovely as always. But I think we should go. Marcus stood immediately, helping Sophie out of her chair. William remained seated, his face flushed with anger or embarrassment, or both. Running away again. Just like you ran from the company when things got difficult. Victoria turned back and Marcus saw something fierce in her expression, something that had been building for 34 years and was finally breaking free. I didn't run from the company. I lost it because I refused to marry a stranger to satisfy a board of misogynists who couldn't accept that a woman could run it better than any man they'd choose. She took a step toward the table toward her father, her voice rising with each word. And you know what I learned from that? I'd rather lose everything than compromise who I am to please people who will never be satisfied anyway. She walked out and Marcus followed with Sophie, leaving a table full of shocked silence behind them. In the car on the way back to the city, Victoria stared out the window. Her jaw clenched tight enough that Marcus worried she'd crack a tooth. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have brought you into that. It was selfish. It wasn't selfish. You needed support. That's what friends do, friends. She turned to look at him, something vulnerable in her eyes. Is that what we are, aren't we? She smiled, small and sad and genuine. Yeah, I guess we are. Sophie, who'd been quiet since they left, spoke up from her seat. Your dad isn't very nice. No, he's not. My grandpa wasn't nice either. Daddy's dad. He yelled a lot and made Daddy sad. Sophie delivered the observation with the matter-of-fact wisdom of childhood. But Daddy says just because someone's family doesn't mean they get to be mean. Victoria looked at Marcus, surprised. He shrugged. Kids hear things. Might as well teach them to interpret correctly. That's very wise. Victoria reached over and took Sophie's hand. Thank you for coming with me today, Sophie. You made it much better than it would have been. You're welcome. Next Thanksgiving, you should just come to our place. Daddy makes really good turkey and we watch movies and it's way better than fancy dinners. I'd like that. Victoria's voice was thick with emotion. I'd really like that. After they dropped Victoria off at her apartment, Sophie fell asleep on the subway ride back to Queens, exhausted from the long day. Marcus carried her up the 3 flights of stairs to their apartment, tucked her into bed, still in her dress because he didn't want to wake her. His phone buzzed as he was making tea. Victoria, I canceled the contract, the marriage agreement. I had my lawyers dissolve it completely. I should have done it weeks ago, but I kept thinking maybe I'd need it. Maybe there'd be some way to use it. But tonight made me realize I don't want that life anymore. I don't want any of it. I just wanted you to know. Marcus stared at the message for a long time. That contract had represented everything: $50 million security for Sophie, a life free from financial worry. And Victoria had just erased it, completely cutting off even the theoretical possibility. He typed back, Good. You deserve better than a life built on contracts. Her response came quickly. I'm starting to believe that. Thanks to you. Thanks to Sophie. What are you doing for Christmas? There was a long pause before she responded. I don't know. Probably nothing. My family celebrations are usually obligation rather than joy. Then come spend it with us. Nothing fancy, just dinner and bad Christmas movies and Sophie's excitement about presents. But it'll be real. Another pause longer this time. I'd love that. Thank you. Marcus sat down his phone and looked around his tiny apartment at the cramped kitchen and the secondhand furniture and the water stain on the ceiling that still looked like South America. He'd turned down $50 million to keep this life, to stay true to his values, to honor the promise he'd made to Sarah. And somehow, in losing everything she'd built, Victoria had found her way here too. To friendship, to honesty, to something real that couldn't be bought or negotiated or contracted. It wasn't what either of them had planned. But maybe Marcus thought, as he finished his tea and headed to bed, that was exactly the point. Christmas came to Queens with a dusting of snow that turned the streets briefly magical before the plows turned it gray. Marcus spent Christmas Eve morning cleaning the apartment with a thoroughness that made Sophie giggle. Daddy, Victoria has seen our place before. You don't have to make it perfect. I'm not making it perfect. I'm making it presentable. He scrubbed at a stubborn stain on the kitchen counter. There's a difference. You're nervous. I'm not nervous. You cleaned the bathroom twice. Marcus stopped scrubbing and looked at his daughter, who was sitting at their small kitchen table wrapping a present she'd made for Victoria in secret. Okay, maybe I'm a little nervous. Why, it's just Victoria. Just Victoria. As if a billionaire spending Christmas in their tiny apartment was an everyday occurrence. But Sophie was right in a way. Over the past month, Victoria had become part of their routine, their orbit. And that was both wonderful and terrifying. The buzzer rang at 3 o'clock exactly when Victoria said she'd arrive. Marcus pressed the intercom button. It's me. Come on up. Third floor. He opened the apartment door and waited, listening to her footsteps on the stairs. When she appeared on the landing, he almost didn't recognize her. She wore jeans and an oversized sweater, her hair in a simple ponytail, and she carried 2 shopping bags that looked heavy. Merry Christmas. She was slightly breathless from the climb. Merry Christmas. You didn't have to bring anything, I know. I wanted to. She stepped into the apartment, and Marcus saw her take it all in the small artificial tree Sophie had decorated with handmade ornaments. The string lights around the windows. The stockings hung on the wall with command hooks because they didn't have a fireplace. It's perfect. It's small. It's home. That makes it perfect. Sophie came running from her room, nearly tackling Victoria with a hug. You came. Of course I came, I promised, didn't I? Victoria hugged her back, and Marcus noticed how natural the gesture looked, now how much easier she'd become with physical affection over the past weeks. I made you a present, but you can't open it until tomorrow. Tomorrow, Christmas rule. Presents get opened on Christmas morning, right, Daddy? Right? Marcus confirmed, smiling at his daughter's insistence on tradition. But we do have Christmas Eve traditions too. Hot chocolate, Christmas movies, and dinner. Hope you're hungry. Starving, actually. What are we having? Nothing fancy. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. Simple stuff. Sounds perfect. They spent the afternoon in the kitchen together, Marcus cooking, while Victoria helped, and Sophie provided running commentary on everything. Victoria turned out to be a terrible cook, burning the green beans twice before Marcus gently suggested she focus on setting the table instead. But she laughed about it in a way that suggested she was genuinely enjoying herself despite the failure. I can negotiate billion-dollar contracts, but I can't cook vegetables. That's embarrassing. Different skill sets. Marcus kept his voice diplomatic. My skill set is increasingly useless in the real world. That's not true. You helped Sophie with her solar system project, and it was the best one in her class. Because I'm good at research and presentation. Put me in front of a stove, and apparently I'm hopeless. Everyone's good at different things. Sophie delivered the wisdom with absolute certainty. Daddy can't do cartwheels, but I can. That doesn't make him useless. Victoria laughed a real full laugh that made Marcus smile. That's a very good point, Sophie. Dinner was chaotic in the best way. The tiny kitchen table barely fit 3 people, and they had to navigate around each other to pass dishes, but it felt warm and alive in ways Marcus's apartment usually didn't. Victoria told stories about disastrous family Christmases from her childhood, and Sophie countered with the year Marcus had accidentally set a kitchen towel on fire, trying to flambe something he'd seen on a cooking show. You tried to flambe, Victoria's eyebrows rose. I was trying to impress Sophie's kindergarten teacher. We'd been dating for about 2 weeks. What happened? The fire alarm went off, the sprinklers came on, and she decided I was too high risk for a relationship. Victoria was laughing so hard she had tears in her eyes. That's the most Marcus story I've ever heard. What's that supposed to mean? It means you tried something completely outside your comfort zone because you cared about someone. And when it went badly, you were honest about it instead of making excuses. She wiped her eyes. That's very you. After dinner, they settled on the couch to watch Christmas movies, Sophie wedged between them, clutching a mug of hot chocolate with marshmallows. They started with Home Alone, which Sophie had seen a dozen times but still found hilarious. Halfway through the movie, Marcus glanced over to find Victoria watching Sophie instead of the screen, her expression soft in the glow from the TV. You okay? She nodded. I was just thinking about my Christmases growing up. They were always so formal. Catered dinners, expensive gifts that someone else had picked out, conversations that felt like performance art. She looked at him. This is the first Christmas I can remember that actually feels like Christmas. Glad we could provide the authentic experience, complete with burned green beans and a too small table, especially because of those things. She reached across Sophie to squeeze his hand. Thank you for including me. By the time the movie ended, Sophie was fighting to keep her eyes open. Marcus carried her to bed, tucking her in and listening to her sleepy requests for stories about her mother. Tell me about the Christmas when Mommy made the gingerbread house. Marcus smiled, settling on the edge of her bed. She spent 3 days on that house, used real icing candy canes for the pillars, gumdrops for the roof. It was a work of art, and then what happened? And then our neighbor's cat got in through a window we'd left open and ate half of it before we caught him. Sophie giggled, her eyes drooping. Was Mommy mad? She laughed until she cried. Then she made another one even better than the first. He brushed hair back from her forehead. That was your mom. She never let setbacks stop her from trying again. I wish she was here. Marcus's throat tightened with familiar grief. Me too, baby. Me too. But I'm glad Victoria's here. Sophie's eyes opened slightly, searching his face. Is that okay? To be glad about Victoria even though I miss Mommy. Marcus pulled her close, holding her tight. That's more than okay. Your heart is big enough for both. Loving someone new doesn't mean you love someone else less. Sophie thought about this, then nodded. Okay. Good night, Daddy. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, sweetheart. When Marcus returned to the living room, he found Victoria standing by the window looking out at the street below, where a few people were walking home with last-minute gifts. Is she okay? She's good. She asked about her mother. Does she do that often? Most nights, I tell her stories, show her photos. Sarah made me promise to keep her memory alive, and I take that seriously. Victoria turned from the window. You're a good father, Marcus. The best I've ever seen. I'm just doing what any parent should do. No, most parents do the bare minimum. You do everything. She moved to sit on the couch and Marcus joined her. Can I ask you something? Sure. When Sophie asked about her mother just now, did she mention me? Marcus considered lying, protecting Victoria from the weight of the question, but he'd promised himself he'd always be honest with her. She said she was glad you were here. Then she asked if it was okay to be glad about you while still missing her mom. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. What did you tell her? That her heart was big enough for both? That loving someone new doesn't mean loving someone else less? Do you believe that? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning that went far beyond Sophie's innocent wondering. Marcus took a breath, knowing his answer mattered more than he could fully understand. Yeah, I do. Victoria wiped at her eyes. I never expected this, you know. When I walked into that restaurant and found you at my table, I never imagined it would lead here. To your apartment on Christmas Eve. To feeling like I have a family again. Or maybe for the first time. She looked at him, vulnerability written across her face. My parents gave me everything money could buy, but they never gave me this. This feeling of being wanted for who I am, not what I can provide. Victoria, let me finish, please. She took his hand, her fingers trembling slightly. The last few months have been the hardest of my life. I lost my company, my identity, everything I thought defined me, and I was terrified I'd have nothing left. She squeezed his hand. But then there was you, and Sophie, and Saturday afternoons at the park, and terrible pizza and conversations that mattered. A tear slipped down her cheek. You saved me, Marcus. Both of you. And I don't know how to thank you for that. You don't need to thank us. We're just being your friends. It's more than that, and you know it. Victoria shifted to face him more fully, and Marcus felt his heart start to pound. I'm falling in love with you. With both of you. With this life you've built, it's real and honest and everything mine never was. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. And I know that's probably not what you want to hear. And I know the timing is terrible. But I needed to tell you because I'm tired of not saying what I feel. Marcus's hands were shaking. He'd known on some level that this was coming, had felt the shift in their relationship over the past weeks. But hearing it said out loud made it real in ways he wasn't prepared for. Victoria, wow. You don't have to say anything. I'm not asking for anything to change. I just needed you to know. She started to pull her hand away, but Marcus held on. Stop, let me talk. He waited until she looked at him, until those gray-green eyes met his. When Sarah died, I thought that was it for me. I thought I'd had my chance at love, and I'd lost it. And the best I could hope for was to be a good father and get through each day. He paused, gathering courage. I wasn't looking for anything else. I wasn't looking for you. But then you sat down at that wrong table and you were this brilliant, terrifying woman who didn't belong in my world at all. and I thought that would be the end of it. One weird night, a strange story to tell later. But Victoria's voice was barely audible. But you kept showing up. You kept being honest and vulnerable and real even when it was hard. And somewhere along the way, you became part of my life in a way I didn't plan for. Marcus took a deep breath. I'm falling for you too. And it scares the hell out of me because I don't know how this works. You're still figuring out who you are without the company. I'm still figuring out how to be a single father. We're from completely different worlds, and we have no idea if this can actually work. But Victoria repeated the word hope flickering in her eyes. But I think we should try. Not because of money or contracts or obligation. Just because I like who I am when I'm with you. Because Sophie lights up when you walk in the room. Because for the first time since Sarah died, I can imagine a future that's about more than just surviving. Victoria's tears spilled over, running down her cheeks unchecked. Are you sure? Because I come with a lot of baggage, a complicated family, a public profile, board meetings I still have to attend even though I'm not CEO anymore. It's not going to be simple. Nothing worth having is simple. Marcus reached up and wiped away her tears with his thumb. But I think we can figure it out if we're honest with each other. If we take it slow and don't try to force it into something, it's not slow. I can do slow. She laughed through her tears. That's new for me. I usually try to solve everything immediately. They sat close, Victoria's head on Marcus's shoulder, and for a long time neither of them spoke. Then Victoria lifted her head, looked at him, and in her eyes Marcus saw a question. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. Their lips met, soft and tentative, full of possibility and promise, and all the things they'd been too afraid to say out loud. When they pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Victoria smiled. Merry Christmas, Marcus. Merry Christmas, Victoria. Outside, snow began to fall on Queens, covering the streets in white, making everything clean and new. Inside, two people from different worlds found their way to each other, not through contracts or negotiations or careful planning, but through honesty and friendship and the willingness to take a chance on something real. Christmas morning arrived with Sophie's excited shriek from her room. Marcus and Victoria, who'd fallen asleep on the couch, woke to find her standing in front of them, vibrating with anticipation. It's Christmas. Can we open presents? Good morning to you too, sweetheart. Marcus stretched his back, protesting from a night on the couch. Yes, we can open presents. Sophie didn't need to be told twice. She ran to the tree and started distributing gifts with the efficiency of a tiny logistics coordinator. When she got to Victoria's present, she held it out with both hands. This one's special. I made it myself. Victoria took the gift wrapped in paper covered with Sophie's drawings and opened it carefully. Inside was a card made from construction paper covered in glitter and markers and Sophie's careful 7-year-old handwriting. The drawing showed 3 stick figures, Marcus, Sophie, and Victoria. Above them, in letters that wobbled slightly, Sophie had written our family. Victoria broke down, crying happy tears that she didn't try to hide. She pulled Sophie into a fierce hug. This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me. Thank you. You're welcome. Does this mean you're staying? If your dad will have me. Victoria looked at Marcus over Sophie's head at question and hope mixed together. We'd like that very much. Marcus pulled them both close, 3 people who'd found each other in the most unlikely way, building something new from broken pieces, and honest choices and the courage to try again. Outside, the city moved on indifferent to small human moments of connection. But here in a tiny apartment in Queens, something important was beginning. Not a contract or a transaction, but a family. Real and messy and perfect in all its imperfection. And for the first time in a long time, Marcus Cole looked at the future and saw not just survival, but joy.